Welcome to Global Government Forum's webinar on making digital work for finance professionals with our knowledge partners Workday. My name is Kevin Sorkin and I'm the publisher of Global Government Forum. I'm delighted to be joined by our presenters for today, who are Paul Coombs, Finance Director for the Crown Commercial Service, and Edward Bass, Technology Specialist at Workday. After we have heard from our presenters, there will be plenty of opportunity to ask written questions via the webinar's Q&A facility on your screens. Slides for today's presentations, together with a recording of the webinar and written summary, will be available to download on globalgovernmentforum.com in a few days' time.
My name is Paul Coombs. I'm the Director of Finance, Planning and Performance at Crown Commercial Service, and I'm here today to explain our journey with Workday and how we're transforming finance in CCS.
Thank you very much, Paul. So if we move on to our agenda slide. So my name is Edward Bass, an account executive at Workday. I've been here now around about 4 years, and I've been working across the government sector since our first customers were introduced a few years ago. And my background originally was Home Office finance, but since then I've been a consultant and helping organisations deliver transformation across the world, actually, over the last 20 years. So after my brief introduction, we'll then listen to Paul, who will give his story around his transformation journey, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit around our roadmap and where we see finance going in the future. So, key slide for us here is obviously when you're dealing with any cloud SaaS provider, please ensure that you make any decisions you do make around the software that's available today. But also, I think it's a very important slide because it starts to introduce the concept of partnership. Now, partnership is very important because our roadmap needs to be aligned with your outcomes and your objectives. So when we think about our roadmap, obviously make your decisions on what you see today, but also consider that, with Workday and hopefully other vendors you talk to, it's important to have confidence that the roadmap is something that can be influenced by you and something that you can benefit from and deliver that transformation going forwards. Now, if we put this into context, why are we talking today? Well, we had a presentation last year where we talked very much around in a webinar, if you like, very much around supporting the civil service decision making. But what we're talking around today is really building that capability to support that decision making in terms of Mike Driver's, I think, fantastic quote on the subject, which is we put finance at the heart of decision making and driving the agenda, not just keeping score. I think really puts this into context. So it's really important that there are a couple of themes that I think we'll need to pull out of this. One of those themes is, finance wants to be at the heart of all decision making. To do that, you obviously need to have the right skills, competency, and the right information, the relevant information for that. But I think the most important word here is you want to be pulled into those conversations. And those conversations need to be much more than just being the referee in terms of keeping score on past performance and future outputs and so on. It must be much more strategic and aligned to really the overall goals of the department. So bringing that creativity to bear also is, I think, a really important theme when it comes to if you like, the function of finance of the future. So we understand finance is critical to government success. There are no money trees out there, and there is no never-ending pot of money. We have quite a lot to deliver across government. There's a wide portfolio, and there is challenge for every penny that is spent. So obviously, it's really important that when departments are looking for systems to underpin transformation and drive engagement and talent retention, that they think about transformative change, transparency and accountability, and workforce engagement. But even when you think about transformative change, please don't think about that as a one-off event. Transformative change has to be something that is continual, as is the need to increase transparency, accountability, and for ever increasement in terms of workforce engagement. I always think about self-service and mobile when I think about workforce engagement, but it's much more than that, obviously, when you think about business partnering and the overall role of finance across the departments. Because ultimately, finance won't necessarily deliver a better passport, a better judicial review outcome, or if you like, better decision making. But what it will do is it will ensure that you have the right environment to optimise those decisions and those outcomes. So in our interactions with the public sector, we hear a lot of issues that you face, and a lot of those themes are if you like, consistent. And the need to modernise operations to be more agile, productive, better serve the constituency, and be able to make better decisions faster to mitigate risk and to become more resilient in changing times are really what it's all about. That is the goal that we're ultimately seeking to achieve. And if you like, government agencies, as we know, are under tremendous pressure to manage budgets. And I think we'll hear from Paul as he talks through his presentation how he's achieving success within the challenging environment that he operates. So as I said, the previous webinar, it's well worth looking at that. We've provided a couple of links. There's a write-up, thank you, Kevin, and there's also the on-demand link to the webinar itself. And that's all around, our thoughts in terms of better serving the, if you like, the overall department in terms of being more relevant across finance in terms of information that you're serving. And you'll hear us talk about, getting down to the driver level. So you're not just talking in terms of financial numbers, but you're talking in terms of operationally, what are the activities and how those activities align to the finances. But just to tee Paul up a little bit here, building the capabilities for digital finance in government, yes, it's around change and transformation. The question there is, does it relate to me? Well, I think it relates to everybody. I think finance is something that everybody should be involved in. So we'll listen to Paul talk about his journey there, and then we'll consider the evolving shape of the finance function going forwards, and at the end talk around thinking about partnering for success and some of our plans and how those align to our customers. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Paul, and he'll take us through the Crown Commercial Service project.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thanks again to the Global Government Forum for inviting me to talk to you all this morning to share our experience in CCS of how we're building our finance and HR capabilities as part of a wider transformation program. Now, I know I've got some CCS colleagues on the webinar, so by way of introduction, the person on this first slide is not me. It's for those who think it might be me. It's actually one of our CCS colleagues, part of the face of CCS, as we call it, the CCS family. So I just wanted to clarify that isn't actually me there. Okay, so moving on then, and as Ed has said, I'm here really to take you through the journey that we're on, and as Ed has said, it doesn't ever end. What were the drivers for change for us at CCS? So this slide lists those drivers for change that we highlighted in our business case for our new solution. Nothing radical here, but the key point to make is that moving to an integrated cloud-based digital solution was not intended to be a cost-saving project. Okay, it was about transforming CCS. It was about changing the way of working for all of our employees, creating improvement in understanding the business and accountability for line managers and CCS, with our staff interacting with HR and finance processes largely through self-service, and self-service will be a theme that I'll keep returning to here. And whilst there would be obviously some HR and finance function efficiencies, with time being saved on centralized administrative tasks, the benefits from efficiency actually for us was around diverting our finance and HR colleagues to more value-adding activities in the future, moving things into the line, increasing skills and capabilities throughout the organization, not just in the finance function, for managing people and money across the business as a whole. So we're moving very much away in our transformation from a traditional centralized approach to things, and actually having a much more empowered and devolved way of doing finance and doing HR. We were, though, very clear at the beginning what our requirements were with our transformation. So our chosen solution needed to be modern, obviously kept up to date, well supported, given its criticality to effective governance. We needed to enable and support capability improvement. In our case, around recording and management of capability within the organisation. We had no central way of managing that or recording that previously. Our solution needed to be flexible, scalable, such that changes required for that ongoing journey of transformation could be made with a minimum of incremental cost. We needed to provide, specifically for us actually, a common view of resources, both human and financial, within the business to support operations and monitoring against our plans. And as I say, that was a key requirement throughout the organisation. Obviously, we needed a solution that provided a full audit trail from the start and finish of all transactions, wherever that work is done, that improved our business user experience in transactions as well. Obviously, to maximise efficiencies as well, reducing the amount of manual intervention that we were experiencing, minimise rekeying, all of that normal stuff that you'd expect, but underpinning, an improvement in the way that we were governing and controlling the organisation in an enabling way. At the time, GDPR was coming in, so that was a key requirement of us, that we had a compliant solution going forward, and that overall the solution needed to be very user-friendly, be largely self-service, as I say, and allow for that sort of self-generated, in-the-moment type reporting that our business required, and that ultimately our users liked as well. And finally, it was around having a solution that really was going to be used by the business as a whole to run the business well, become a well-run organisation through the use of a digital solution, and changing the culture in that sense as well. So I've talked about self-service already. Purely coincidentally, actually, for us, a clue to our actual transformation is in our chosen system's title of Workday. It's about, for us, making effective management of HR and finance the day job for all managers and staff, empowering staff and making finance and HR, as I say, ingrained in the DNA of the organisation rather than being done in the back office. So about bringing the back office into the line. We saw self-service freeing up the finance teams and HR teams, as I said before, to provide much more value-adding advice, support and challenge to the wider business in real time. And we deliberately wanted an integrated finance and HR solution, not least to provide a single version of the truth, particularly in our case, as our biggest cost base is pay, and we're a people organisation. So we needed a single version of the truth when it came to looking at our pay costs and our people costs. So an integrated solution was very much part of that transformation, and self-service applying equally to both finance and HR type work. I think it's fair to say that introducing a cloud-based digital solution intended to change the culture needed to be respected as a change management project in its own right. It's not just about implementing a system. And so in our case, to manage that change, we identify 5 integrated work streams to ensure that the change was a success. The project required a blend of business change and IT skills, and essentially needed experienced internal colleagues to optimize the implementation and to lead the change from within. There was emphasis on supporting all employees through that transition, from a back office to that sort of in the line self-service approach, and we spent a lot of time and effort on the change management aspects of the implementation. We obviously needed good project governance in implementing the change, and that meant actually making sure that the work streams themselves were well managed and that they were integrated together as we went through our change. We also needed to provide really good guidance and advice to users on specific finance-related processes and HR process flows, because for many colleagues, it's the first time that they would be expected to be, largely involved in those processes, and it wasn't something they handed off to other people. And that really is part of the transformation culture that we were looking for. We obviously had to upskill our own people in finance and in HR to support that evolving community in the business. And colleagues in finance, much more thinking about reports, thinking about dashboards, thinking about how to get messages across and how information can be shared better. We put a lot of effort into the whole organization-wide change that we were introducing, and that journey, and lots of guidance materials, lots of YouTube videos, all of that sort of stuff to make sure that the change was really embedded in the hearts and minds of our people. And we also spoke to others, obviously, that have been going through similar change programs. So collaborating with other bodies, other partners, and learning from each other was also a critical part of managing the change as well. Just looping back to what Ed said earlier about the government finance function strategy and the 6 objectives that are set out in the finance function strategy, we'd like to think actually that our implementation links to those objectives. So I'll just run through those if that's okay. Obviously, getting the basics right is about robust data, about efficient transaction processing, effective risk management, supported by policies, guidance, strong leadership. So in our case, again, that was largely around a single version of the truth, having those integrated processes. It meant reducing manual process, increasing automation, and strengthening integral controls within our solution. On the people, diversity, and capability objective, obviously that's about having people in the right roles with the right skills. So in our case, that has actually led to, as I said, an upskilling intent for the finance team as a whole. We've actually restructured the finance team as a result of that, with more value-adding roles, looking forward, less transaction processing into the future, and general upskilling of our people. The how we operate objective is obviously around having a modern, collaborative finance function that delivers quality services more effectively and efficiently. So again, for us, that was the finance function and the HR functions working much more closely with the wider business, improving processes, business planning, being user-centric, and having that advice, support, and challenge approach integral to the way that we manage our resources. Insight, obviously a function informed by analysis, underpinned by good quality data, supported by analytics, visual tools. Well, again, for us, that was around reporting, improvements to our static monthly reporting, but also developing in the moment type reporting, and using the system, if you like, in real time when we're having conversations with budget holders and managers. The trusted partner objective, obviously, it's around being the go-to partner, providing expert advice, support, and challenge. And again, the real-time aspect of our new approach, that single source of the truth. Again, the ability, I mean, it sounds quite mundane, but the ability to actually drill down in the meeting, to get right to the heart, to see a transaction, is so empowering for line managers and staff when you've got a business partner that can do that in the moment, as opposed to saying, I'll get back to you next week on that one. So that's quite transformative in and of itself. And just being, allowing then the finance business partner to be in the room when those sorts of business questions and business decisions are potentially being made. So that really is being at the heart of decision making then, with budget holders, managers, and leaders in the organisation. And then finally, planning, risk, and performance. Obviously, that's having a strong culture of planning, risk, and performance, integrated financial business planning, robust risk assurance. And again, for us, that whole integration for us around finance and HR was massively empowering, and will be massively empowering as we go forward. And again, that whole performance reporting aspect of our transformation is critical, I think, for that objective. So that's largely a run through and a quick run through of our transformation. But it's still early days for us. We haven't yet finished our first annual cycle of using the new solution. But I can already see the transformative aspects of it, and how it will enable the business to really engage with finance, HR as an integration going forward. Thank you.
Paul, that's fantastic, and a great script, I think, and a great example of how finance, through the introduction of a new solution, but the right solution, can transform with that key alignment to, if like, the overall government objectives for finance. And I think when I look back at those 6 key finance function strategy objectives, and I consider how well they're aligned equally to our product roadmap, I think we all feel comfortable that we're all on this journey together. So if we have a look really at the future of finance from a Workday perspective, and as I said, this is somewhat, this is obviously a futures-based view of the world, but I've also had a look at some of the Hackett and PwC studies that are out there. One of the things I think is really important here to note is if you like, data makes a difference. So, when we think about what is data, I think historically data from a finance perspective was usually anything that had if you like, a pounds and pence related to it, and it was very, very little around how many of those key drivers underpinning the fiscal values that were present in there. But of course, when you're thinking about integrated business planning, one of those key areas to think about planning is obviously one of the key costs, which is people. So if you have key alignment between your finance and your HR down to people, performance, talent, diversity, and also looking at future needs and capability to deliver against those needs, it's more than just putting an FTE count on an income statement at the end of the month. It has to be much more thorough than that in terms of how you're working at the sharp end in terms of operations, in terms of how they're able to deliver today's outcomes against today's SLAs, and also to meet the demands coming down the road towards them in the future, so that workforce planning and that finance planning is very much working hand in hand together. But it's also more than that, because if you go behind the people plan, or behind the finance plan when it comes to CapEx projects and so on, is thinking about how many decisions, how much legislation do I need to introduce, how many people do I need in policy, because an area may be increasing in terms of the legislative requirements and needs to meet those needs operationally, so needs to provide better policy guidance. So it's looking at how successful against judicial review decisions are, and then looking back at, if you like, the departments that are providing the advice and guidance to make sure that they are aligned in terms of staff profiles to be able to deliver that, to then minimise the risk, if you like, of decisions being overturned. So that's just a small example, but we could find many examples where, if you get down at a driver level and start understanding what's behind the finance, behind the people, behind the figures, you can then make a strategic difference in terms of the service that you're delivering. And it's that creativity, I think, that finance is in a very good place to be able to deliver if they've got the numbers. So, if you like, having the right data is essential. If you like, it's the magic that makes it possible. But it's having the right skills that, if you like, then turns that right data into the appropriate insights that is needed. So when we consider, we've all done, I think, extremely well in finance. So we've now flipped the pyramid. So we're now spending probably equal parts of time on inside action, report compliance, and transaction processing. But now with the demands on finance to become that business partner to provide more strategic insight across the business, we need to do much more than that. And what's quite interesting is that if you look at some of the top unicorns and internet, sort of leading companies out there, PwC did some research recently, and they were finding that actually now, when you look at the job ads for finance, the hiring profiles are becoming very different now. They're looking much, much more now for people that are delivering insight and action, and far less around transaction processing. So we need to deliver a roadmap which, if you like, mirrors that. So what are we doing? So we're thinking about those standard, if you like, pillars of finance. So when we think about, procure to pay, for example, what we're doing there is we're introducing machine learning into the scanning process so that, it's all very well that an invoice will match a purchase order and a receipt correctly, but what happens if it doesn't? Who needs to deal with that? Or what happens if there isn't an order? You're paying for legal fees. It might be a barrister and you're not sure how many hours that barrister will spend on a particular case, but it needs to flow through very quickly through to settlement. And it's through the use of machine learning that we see that we can then apply, if you like, the learnings from the past to those invoices of the future so that they can then be processed automatically, seamlessly, in a way that I would describe that as, if you like, frictionless, so that things pass through finance and work with the business. And as Paul said, putting these things back in the line, if you like, so they become part of the business activity. So not only it's a question of engaging with suppliers outside and buying from those suppliers outside, but it's also being a part of that overall finance settlement piece as well, and doing it as if you like, frictionlessly as possible. So those are some of the things that we're doing there. When we think about record to report, we're doing much more to allow you to bring in the extra dynamic of operational information back in with your financial information, and to align that into an integrated business plan, so that you can not only look at your people, your finance, your projects, your capex, and your underlying deliverables, but you can align that now much more easily with the sort of profiles that you would expect. So apply a bit of machine learning into that planning process, and you can then start to model and profile your plan so that your expectations of delivering against the plan in terms of the certainty around that can be increased, your understanding of your cash flow can be far increased, and therefore your ability to manage that cash flow can be increased as well. And that can also start to deliver what we call a 0-day month end. If you can do all of your activities within finance and automate everything as possible, then why can't you actually start thinking about closing your books on day 0 and start getting that key insight into and back to the business on the first day of the close, rather than having to wait 5, 10, 15 days later. So those are very much some of the things that we're doing across finance to deliver greater insight for action. So as I said, it's all I think about in automation across those key pillars of finance and making them as frictionless as possible. And that very much aligns really to that sort of future finance strategy that we're talking about here. As I said, I think we've talked about the intelligent automation, and in terms of any bottlenecks in there, with a business process tool, you should be able to see those bottlenecks and automatically be recommended as to how you can improve those. So why can't the system provide, in fact, the business process tool as being part of, if you like, managing and improving the automation within the business, so that bottlenecks are sought, are found, and are resolved. And the augmented insights, so that's, as I said, I've described before. I think that's just getting down to the individual drivers. And then that predictive guidance, again, if you can apply the learnings from the past and put a bit of machine learning behind that, so that in your integrated business plan, it's not just taking the numbers, but it's taking the learnings from the past as well, then you can predict and optimize your plans, and you can also more easily, more quickly cascade those down to departments and cascade them back up as well. And then you get what I always think of is that the wider the platform for planning, the greater the wisdom from the crowd into that planning exercise. And therefore, the more accuracy that you're driving out of it. So that's very much what we're thinking about in terms of our future vision for for finance is really, as I said, it's providing you with an automation where it's required. It's providing you with insight that's needed and that predictive guidance. But much more than that, it's actually working with you to deliver that as a service. It's really important that when you consider buying into a SaaS strategy for finance, that, as I said at the start, that you're working with a provider that is got a roadmap which is aligned to your overall strategy, and we've talked about the 6 key points for government finance as set down by Mike Triver in terms of putting finance back at the heart of all decision making. And as I said, I think it's really important that you get more senior advisors that upskill into that role and become much more strategic around the advice they get, and that they get pulled into the conversations. I think when you've been successful is when you're pulled into the conversation and people say, well, I can't talk about that because I haven't got my finance partner in the conversation. That's when you know you're successful. And I think Paul, you're very, very much on that journey, and you're getting there, if not got there, today. But if we think about the partnering for the future, obviously it's important to know that we have other customers that are like you. So at the moment we have quite a lot of customers within the UK public sector, but what I haven't put on this slide is the customers that we have around the rest of the world, whether it be the entire Singapore government that is moving on to Workday, and we can all learn from them. They were at our conference only late last year, and they were sharing their knowledge with the UK cabinet team, for example. Or we can look at even organisations like a recent sign-up to Workday. It's the Francis Crick Institute, who have taken on Workday for their finance and HR, but also to run their projects. They're funded a lot by Bayes in terms of their research projects. So there's quite tight handshaking between Bayes and Francis Crick in terms of what they're delivering from a research point of view. So, if you're a research organisation, you want to talk to somebody who is delivering research for government within the UK not-for-profit sector, then a very good example as well. But what's really important about these is that any initiatives that drive change and drive roadmap within the overall service that we deliver, that is then updated on a twice yearly basis, become available to everybody. So it's if you like, working together with our customers that we can then drive the roadmap forwards, and we can drive the greatest change enabling environment for you. So that's all I really wanted to say about our journey going forwards, and I think we've got quite a lot of interesting questions. So we've finished the core content for you, and I hope that you've enjoyed the learning from Paul around his project, and we can take a few questions now around that or any other topic.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul and Edward, for very insightful presentations. Just to remind everybody, there is a question and answer facility on your screens. If you would like to ask any written questions through that function, you should be able to find it at the bottom of your screens now. We will also, I can answer one of the questions we've already been asked, which is we can also confirm that presentations together with recordings of the webinar and written summary will be available to download in a few days' time on globalgovernmentforum.com, and we'll make you well aware of that when it's available. I think really one of our first questions that came in was for Paul, and I think I'll start with that and it's to ask his views on the notion of self-service is always work in progress. So, Paul, could we have your views on that notion, please?
Of course, and thanks to Malcolm. Hi, Malcolm. So yes, absolutely. Self-service will be work in progress. You don't suddenly turn on self-service overnight when you adopt a new solution such as Workday, and it's about literally growing the business to become much more comfortable with self-service. Obviously, the initial self-service is largely around the sorts of transactions that managers and staff, now need to get involved in, like expenses and approving orders and payments and that side of things. The next step for us will obviously be around self-serving on interrogating the data, interrogating the information, using the report writing, and using the system and the solution for gaining their own insight into what's going on. and not relying upon those static type reporting. So absolutely agree with the point, I think, underpinning the question, that it will always be a work in progress. And I think the role of the finance function going forward is to understand how colleagues in the business are self-serving. Are they self-serving the right things? Are they self-serving at the right time? And a focus on how the system, if you like, is being used by the business will become a key focus and a key capability for the finance function going forward. So yes, absolutely, will be a journey and will always be work in progress.
I'm going to just go to Jennifer Torr's question and then come back to Robert's, which has been asked, because it relates to your previous answer, Paul. I think it follows on from, and that's: do you think we need as many finance professionals going forward? Do finance professionals need to upskill in IT, Excel skills, data analysis, etc.?
I think the honest answer is we will need different types of finance professionals in the future. The number, I think, of finance colleagues involved in any business at any one time is largely driven by the context of that business and the journey that business is on, and how mature that business is. But it's clear that the future will be a different type of finance professional will be required. And yes, they definitely will need to be more highly skilled in data, in analysis, and in partnering as well. The softer human aspects, more human aspects to the work of the finance professional in the future. The heavy lifting, if you like, that finance professionals used to do in the past is now automated, is now just done behind the scenes inside the box in the future. So it's how finance professionals use that data, the system, the integrations, the automation that's there at their disposal to turn that into real insight. So not sure about how many any organization needs in the future, because I think that's context specific, but we certainly need different types of professionals, much wider skilled professionals, much more than just finance.
Okay. Robert Thorpe has asked, I would welcome any insights you can give around what works well in terms of visualization dashboards.
Well, I'll just give a personal insight into that. I think it very much depends on the individual user sometimes. And what you need is a flexible approach that can adapt reports. Obviously, some people like to see tables. Other people like to see diagrams or pictures. So I think the approach really is how can we have a flexible solution, and we can tailor reporting to individual user needs there. And what works well is what works well for the organisation and the individual. I don't think there's any stock answer to what works well other than be flexible. I don't know, Ed, if you want to add to that.
Well, actually, Paul, I wanted to add a question back to you on this subject, because there's the one point around information and being able to self-serve on it. So that's what. But the question I have for you is when, because finance now is continually updated, but there are still key events within the finance calendar that bulk update in areas as well. And I was wondering how you're managing with the business to educate them so that they know when they can self-serve as well as what they can self-serve.
Yeah. Good question. I think it's fair to say that there's still the more traditional approach, if you like, inherent in the way that we do business in CCS. There's a monthly reporting cycle. There's a close down that you've mentioned earlier. There's the annual reporting in the annual financial statement. So there's still that sort of more traditional cycle. And we often talk in CCS about, here are the lockdown numbers for month 2, say, or month 3. Yeah. But when we're talking to the business, obviously it's dynamic. The information that you're sharing with budget holders and managers can be up to date and real time. So I think the challenge is how to strike the balance between that more traditional formal reporting with regular cycling, regular cycles, and balance that with, real-time information that often managers, they want the most up-to-date data and they want the most up-to-date insight. And that means that very often they can be ahead of the finance function if they're self-serving. So I'd like to think that the when on self-serve is continuous for managers and for operators. And then the challenge then is for finance to have, one eye on the regular fixed reporting, but also be able to have a conversation with the business, which is in the moment and real time as well. So continuous self-serve, but backed up with the more standard traditional approaches of regular monthly reporting.
Yeah, and I think that's very much aligned with our strategy, which is to through the process of self-serve, and as Paul mentioned before, putting things back in the line. It means that the cost centre managers, that the budget holders and owners know what's coming because they've been involved in the process all the way through, whether it be approving purchasing expenses as simple examples, but also being involved on the, maybe the onboarding and recruiting of staff at the same time as well, or when people are cycling out of their department. So they know, and I think in a sense that's what Paul's confirming, is that they're actually ahead of the game, but they are in agreement with what's there. And so it's a much faster process, and then they can get on with the job of thinking about actually what does my outturn need to look like, and that's where the integrated business plan, I think, is then really key to that whole overall process, is that you can get much more insight into a much more accurate outturn through the art of, if you like, improved self-service.
Okay, I think, oh, sorry, is there more? No, I think I'd like to ask a question around the technology and combine it actually with a sort of wider question that we've thought of previously when conceiving this event. So Jenny's asked, are you limited by the historical accounting systems in place that only spits out data in a certain way? And I want to sort of also broaden that perhaps slightly with, where has your organisation made the most progress in using digital technologies in public finances, and what lessons have you learned? So I wonder, Paul and Ed, if you could expand on that.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a start. So I've mentioned about needing a single version of the truth, and in particular for CCS, that meant largely around headcount and pay. And previously we spent a lot of time reconciling between the HR record, the finance record, the budget holders record. I think we've now passed through that, and now we have a single version of the truth within the system, if you like, because everything feeds the system and everything comes out of the system. How have we in CCS made most use of the digital technology? It's in establishing that that Workday, in our case, is the single version of the truth. It tells the truth. It is the truth. There's no alternative record being kept of data or reporting in the organisation, but also through the automation that's inherent within the system as well. Minimizing manual intervention, removing that need for those reconciliations between the systems. I mean, and coming back to Jenny's question there, limited by historical accounting systems. I think again that's more around what I said in answer to the other question around the challenge being combining that more traditional reporting approach with the real-time ability to interrogate the system yourself as a manager as well. So I think the limitation is not around the historical accounting systems as such, Jenny. It's more around the approach that you take within the business to reporting.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to answer the question from a couple of angles. One is, I think, from what we're seeing in the market around the staff that are hiring. So I mentioned before that when you looked at that PwC study of several thousand new, if you like, job ads that have been in the market over the last year or two, that there is a demand for a change in the sorts of people that have been hired into finance, and those are people now much more aligned to that ability to drive, if you like, insights. And I think that's really important, because when you combine that with the sort of the Hackett review, and where they're talking about saying that you know, top performing organisations are more than twice as likely to be perceived as business partners by the stakeholders. They spend, you know, maybe 15% or more reduction in time spent collecting and collating data, and twice as likely to be perceived as agile in meeting business challenges. It goes back to, you know, the data is key, but it's the right data at the right time in the right place. So what we did that was very different to anybody else is we put finance and HR into the one single solution, and now we've taken that step further to have finance, HR and planning, so that you and analytics, if you like, in the one single solution. So we talk about plan, execute and analyze as being that cyclical function of finance, which is underpinned by strong, closely linked HR and finance information. So you can see, for example, what would be the impact of a retention risk in a key role on the ability of a department to deliver on a particular function and their overall budgets. So it's being able to see that insight across HR and finance, and being able to apply that insight into the planning piece that allows you to, if you like, see and avoid and mitigate risk, and also to, you know, as I said, to be able to stand up tall as that key information provider, that key partner that is perceived as being able to add that greater degree of value. And I think the other point there around self-service. Self-service is something that works two ways. For self-service to be successful, it's got to deliver the right capability at the right time, but it's also got to be usable. It's got to be easy to get on, to use, and to get value out of very quickly. So one of the other key, I think, initiatives that we've done and continue to do across the solution is to make whatever we deliver to the community as easy to use and adopt as possible, because we know that you know, if it isn't, it won't get used and the value is lost.
Okay, I'd like to come on to a question from Chris Wrench, who works as in commercial finance for DEFRA's technology category, and he's asked Paul's thoughts around around building supplier-facing financial capabilities, and in turn balancing resourcing priorities between internal stakeholder financial management and holding supply chains to account.
Yeah. Okay.
For your thoughts, Paul. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks to Chris for that question. Hi, Chris. I think the short answer is yes, and I'll elaborate on that. So I think going forward, the sort of partnerships that finance colleagues need to have with vendor managers within an organisation is absolutely critical. That the finance function understand that relationship that goes on between the business and the supply chains and the suppliers to that business. Obviously, you know, in CCS that's a critical capability as well. So I think that those partnerships between the finance function and vendor managers need to be the first step. So yes, so a balancing between internal stakeholder financial management and working with vendor managers in partnership to, in Chris's words, hold supply chains to account, or to extract the most value from those supply chains. So, but it does very much depend on your internal operating model, though, whether that vendor management is just supported by finance, or actually whether finance are much more involved in doing the vendor management and holding supply chains to account. But certainly, I think in any modern finance function that's using digital as a way of working, it frees up that space then, as I said before, for more value-adding work to be done by finance business partners, and certainly that could entail moving much more into the vendor management space and understanding how we can extract more value from those third-party suppliers into the business.
Okay, and just coming back to skills, with a question Jennifer's asked regarding what skills should a finance professional be developing, seeking going forward, and that's asking to elaborate on wider skills needed. But I'd like to see if we can combine that with a question we posed, which was how are the skills and capabilities required to make use of digital technologies best developed and delivered in the service of finance functions?
So I think generally the skills and competencies that finance staff need are, you know, going back to Ed's slide around the inverted pyramid, it's much more now around, you know, being able to use data to provide insight, much more around partnering, being a business partner rather than a finance partner. So really understanding what your business is about. Whether that's, you know, offering commercial solutions, as in our case, to, you know, registering companies, to building motor vehicles, you know, whatever your business is about, the finance function needs to be expert in that organization's core purpose going forward. So you know, much more general business partnering, not just finance partnering. So less holding to account and more working with the business going forward there. So those skills and capabilities need to be being developed with your existing staff and need to be sought out when you're recruiting new staff. And I think being a good messenger as well is important. Being able to really engage with people, really upskilling on people skills, and also having an attitude, I think, of continuous learning, being very flexible, and being very adaptive going forward as well.
Okay, we have one more question, and then I think I'll ask Paul and Ed for your final thoughts, but the question is, will system performance be improved? Often we are hampered by system performance, especially at month end when loads of users are on the system. Thank you all for your help and great presentation.
So it's Edward here. I'll answer this question. A very simple answer to this is that one of the benefits that Workday brings to bear is that it's a multi-tenanted SaaS environment. What do I mean by that? I mean that we have lots of customers operating in that environment, and we therefore have a large amount of, if you like, tin, in its loosest sense. I'm not going to be too technical here, but a lot of tin underpinning that. And so one of the things that we can do that I think is fairly different in the industry today is we can not only offer a very high availability, service availability, but we can also offer performance SLAs as well. And I think that that is key to a true multi-tenanted SaaS solution, is that ability to not only offer the availability service level agreements, but also to bind ourselves contractually to performance SLAs as well.
And if I could just add to that, from our own experience, this has not been an issue for us. System availability, including with mobile devices, is very good. So I think, again, that starts to change the DNA of the organization, that it's a 24/7 system that doesn't experience any downtime or any real downtime or any loss of performance either.
That's wonderful. Thank you for your answering those questions so well. Okay, could I perhaps ask Paul for your final thoughts on the key takeouts from today? Okay.
Yes, will do. So I think my closing remark is really around the fact that transforming the finance function through the use of a cloud-based digital ERP is not simply about turning off your old system and turning on your new one, but it is about using your new digital solution as a catalyst for that culture change that you're looking for. And the emphasis therefore has to be on how your new solution will change behaviours, hearts and minds, and that should guide your thinking around the future. And whatever digital solution you do choose, it will not be static, until your next refresh. The solution will be continually adapted by the provider. So do choose your system provider carefully, as they and you need to work closely and collaboratively as partners going forward into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And Ed, could I ask you for your final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to focus on service and partnership. We deliver Workday as a service, and for that service to be successful, we need to ensure that we're partnering with our customers so that the updates that are coming and the roadmap that is being developed are aligned and are driving change, continual change and transformation to the benefit of our customers. So that's our focus, is not necessarily on today, but it's ensuring that we have that service that is not just fit for purpose for today, but is driving true change transformation for finance and HR, because we do believe finance and HR is one, in a system sense, is one thing, and driving that all together so that we're all benefiting. And yes, you will see things that will change in the future from other customers, and you will see things that will change in the future from yourselves, but that partnership is the driver behind that. So just remember, it's a service, it's not a product, it's a service, and you're working with the provider, and in this case Workday, to deliver that service. And I always say your go live should be halfway through your project, as a way of, if you like, thinking about your overall project. So think about your go live halfway through, and then your second part of that project is then about stabilization, improvement, and then future roadmap.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank our presenters, Paul Coombs and Ed Bass, for their fantastic insights today, and for Workday and their partnership on this webinar. And obviously, I'd like to thank all our participants for taking part and for some wonderful questions. Just to reiterate, the slides and a summary of the webinar, as well as a recording, will be available soon. And we look forward to you joining us on another webinar some point soon. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.